So you think you know stories about great kings? Well, let me tell you about this one. He was a king who conquered the entire world. But his greatest battle, the one that really mattered, that was fought right inside himself. This is the incredible story of King Pandu, a ruler whose journey is just wow. It takes us from the absolute pinnacle of power to the deepest, most profound kind of penance. Our story kicks off with a campaign of just absolute dominance. With his massive army, King Pandu basically sweeps across the known world. You can almost see it here on the map, his power just spreading like wildfire from his capital, Hastinapura. His arrows were said to be like flames, and pretty soon every other monarch on earth just bowed down. He was, without a doubt, the most powerful man alive. And so this begins the first chapter of his life, a chapter that's all about one thing: overwhelming, unbelievable, worldly success. So what does the tribute of the entire world actually look like? Well, when Ponda returned home, the victory parade stretched farther than you could possibly see. I mean, just try to picture it. Countless elephants, camels, and chariots, all just overflowing with precious stones, gold, silver, the rarest treasures from literally every corner of the globe. But here's where the story gets really interesting, because despite having all this unimaginable wealth, Pandu, he just wasn't into it. He had little personal interest in it at all. He gave it all away to his brothers and priests. You see, his heart wasn't in that gilded palace. It was out in the quiet forests and the wide open plains. It was this deep restlessness, a sign that the world he had just conquered could never really satisfy him. He was a conqueror totally unswayed by his own conquests. So this pull he felt, this internal conflict, it led him to make a pretty shocking decision: to leave the very city he had just made rich beyond measure and to make a new home for himself out in the wild. And that's exactly what he did. He, along with his two wives, moved into a simple place up in the Himalayan mountains. He spent his days just roaming the woods and hunting. But look at this. Even though he's living this simple life, he's still wearing his blazing armor and carrying the weapons of a king. To anyone who saw him, he didn't look like a hermit. He looked like a god just casually wandering the earth. But it was here, in this peaceful, beautiful wilderness, that a single, passionate act would come to shatter his world and change his destiny forever. One day, deep in the forest, Pandu spots a pair of huge deer. And in a flash, that primal instinct of the hunt just takes over. No hesitation. He draws his bow and unleashes 5 golden feathered arrows. They fly true, and the male deer falls to the ground, crying out in pain. And then, to the king's absolute shock, the dying deer speaks. Turns out that wasn't an animal at all, but a wise sage, a rishi named Kindama in disguise. And with his last breath, he utters this terrible, terrible curse, one that would forever bind Pandu's fate to his own tragic end. The weights of this curse and the pure shame of what he'd done led Pandu to make the single most important decision of his entire life. Pandu was just utterly crushed. He was completely overcome with this calamitous sense of shame and guilt. He saw his own life as just devoted to sin, a life spent harming innocent creatures. He truly believed the gods themselves had abandoned him, leaving him totally alone with this curse. So in his grief, he decides on a new path, a life of extreme austerity. He declares he's going to take a vow of celibacy, renouncing the very desire that now carried a death sentence. And he begins by physically casting off his old self, carefully laying his royal ornaments and all his jewels on the forest floor. And this was a total transformation. I mean, his own words show just how deep this vow went. He's becoming an ascetic, indifferent to pleasure and pain, totally free from anger, and dedicated not to conquest, but to the well-being of all living things. He wasn't just renouncing his wealth, he was renouncing his very identity as a king. So, having abandoned the kingdom of the world, Pandu now began the search for a totally different kind of kingdom. He and his wives journeyed to the remote 100-peaked mountain, and there he traded his throne for the forest floor, eating only fruits and roots and engaging in really severe penance. And the other sages on the mountain, they started to see him not for the king he used to be, but for the man he was becoming: humble, self-controlled, and utterly devoted. And this was the final outcome of his incredible journey. So far from the wealth and violence of his old life, Pandu and his wives found a new kind of happiness. With their minds set only on salvation, they found this state of real, tranquil joy. He had lost the world, but in doing so, he had finally conquered the kingdom of the self. Which leaves us with a really fascinating question to think about. Was that fateful curse a punishment that just destroyed a king's life? Or was it the very thing that set him on the path to true enlightenment? A calamity that in the end actually led to his salvation.